Hi, Todd VanDenburg here with VanDenburg Capital Management and another Uncommon Sense update. So, April's over, and thank goodness it is. Boy, it was an ugly month. It was ugly in a lot of ways. I mean, yeah, the markets were down substantially. I mean, we had the Nasdaq down almost 13%. Um, all the major indices were down substantially for the month. But the part that was sort of most unsettling is the fact that we'd have many, many days where the markets would swing so wildly. I mean, you'd have the markets, the Dow up 400 midday, finishing down 800. I mean, it was just these wild swings. And there's really, no, sort of fundamental math-based reasons for that kind of stuff happening. So as we're looking at this kind of volatility, we just continue to rely heavily on the math and the data to help us decide whether or not what we're seeing is the result of some, fundamental collapse in the U.S. economy, which is then to potentially to predict, a collapse in the stock market, or is this just, volatility because institutional traders are trying to manipulate the market to their benefit over the short term. We sort of think it's the latter. But to give you some evidence of that, we're going to talk today about the recent GDP report that showed that the U.S. economy shrank in the first quarter of 2022 by 1.4%. And immediately the headlines are coming out, oh my gosh, we're headed for a recession. And whenever somebody starts throwing the recession word around, people get afraid. They're like, oh my gosh, the U.S. economy is headed for a downturn. And what I want to talk about today is why we don't think, even if we do have a recession, so if the second quarter is also negative, why we don't think that that's necessarily, something that should lead us to think that the U.S. economy is at the edge of a fundamental collapse. So first off, you have to look at, well, why did the GDP shrink in the first quarter? And in large part, it was due to the fact that businesses couldn't replace their inventories. So there's a global supply shortage brought on by the fact that we shut everything down from COVID, and we still haven't ratcheted everything back up. I mean, it's super easy to shut a business down, but it's pretty hard to get all the employees to come back because a lot of them had to go find different jobs. It's just a much slower process to get your goods and service capacity back up to pre-pandemic levels. So U.S. companies haven't been able to replace inventories, and so that number was lower. And then one of the biggest portions of GDP is actually government spending, and government spending is starting to fall because for the last 2 years, the government spending had increased as a percentage of the GDP by almost 50%. So shouldn't be a shock to anybody that as the government isn't passing these bills every few months to spend 400 billion, a trillion, 2 trillion. I mean, it's like every time we turned around over the last 2 years, the government was throwing all this extra money into the economy. And hey, benefit of the doubt, they thought it was for the best, and it was an emergency, and I'm not being critical of that. I'm just sort of commenting on, do we really expect that government spending is going to continue at the rate that it's been for the past 2 years? And that answer is no. I mean, that's not even a question. It can't. And on a little side note, if you look at why inflation is as high as it is, it's because the government and the Federal Reserve have just flooded the U.S. economy over the past couple of years with dollars. I mean, never in the history of our country has so many dollars been injected into the economy so quickly. So that had to stop. So it's not a shock, and it doesn't mean that there's something fundamentally wrong with the U.S. economy because the government is pulling back on its borrow and spend plan. That's actually a positive sign. Because if the government isn't needing to, borrow and spend in order to, shore up the economy because of the pandemic or some other emergency, that means that the U.S. economy is able to stand on its own 2 feet. and that's a good thing. So we will see some displacement over the coming quarters as the government sort of steps out of the way, and the U.S. economy starts to pick up, and we fully expect that to happen. I mean, all of the signs for employment look good. The housing market is just insane, and you can't possibly have a housing market, construction and just resale, booming as fast as it is right now, unless there's some expectation that the economy, that there are going to be people to buy homes and buy new homes, buy resale homes. So there's not as much negativity out there as the media might want you to believe. But I want you to, as you see these reports coming in about GDP falling and how we're on the verge of the next recession, don't fall back to your old way of thinking and say, oh, recession means U.S. economy's in trouble, because all the evidence and all the data shows that the reason that the GDP might be falling in the coming quarters is the government is getting out of spending as much money as it has the past 2 years, and the U.S. economy is taking up that slack and starting to reopen as more goods and services become available. Then companies will start to refill inventories, and that will is good for the U.S. economy. And so again, we're not negative about. I mean, we don't like to see quarters where the GDP shrinks. I mean, that's not something that we look forward to. But every time we see one of these numbers, especially in a post-pandemic era, we have to look at it in sort of a new light. We can't just say, well, in the past, when this number was negative, it meant something bad coming in the next 6 months, because we're living in a new world where, for the past, for almost 2 years, things were not allowed. The free market economy was not allowed to operate. And again, no criticism of why they did it. I mean, everybody with the best of intentions did what they thought was right to protect people's health. But we can't assume that every time that we see a number that looks bad today, that it means the same thing as it did 5 years ago when that number might have been bad. And that's why following this data is so important. So I'm not going to go into a ton of other math-based details, because I got some commentary on one of my last videos that I was a little long-winded. So I'm gonna sort of end it there. If you have any questions about why we think that a shrinking GDP isn't necessarily an indication of bad economic conditions for the U.S. economy, just post an update, post a comment to this update, send me an email, give me a phone call, reach out in any possible way. I'm happy to answer any question that you might have about that or any other financial matter. Right now, you need to make smart financial decisions. You can't be making emotional financial decisions, because we're going to get back to normal at some point. And if you make an emotional decision today, you could spend years regretting it and fretting over how to make the next decision because you made a bad decision in the past. So that was your update. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give us a like, give us a share, and I'll be back again soon with another Uncommon Sense update. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to be the first to hear of more Uncommon Sense updates like these, please click the subscribe button below. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks again.